What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Point of Attack. This week, I'm going to be talking about underrated players. Players that just don't get the credit that they deserve. So, what makes one player so popular, and then you'll get another player with, very similar stats or maybe even better stats, and they just get no press or they get bad press or whatever it may be. So, the first one I want to talk about is Jordan Howard. And there's probably a lot of you who don't even know who Jordan Howard is, which is a shame because Jordan Howard is a running back for the Chicago Bears. And not a lot of people know who he is. And this guy was a rookie last year. And he's 6'1", 220, so he's kind of a big back. And he finished second in rushing, only behind Ezekiel Elliott. And yet not a lot of people know who he is. He made the Pro Bowl to go with it. The kid had 1,300 yards rushing, and it was only in 13 games too. It wasn't until the Bears actually had injuries to their other running backs before he got a shot. So he came in and in 13 games rushed for 1,300 yards, and he had 300 yards receiving on top of it. So, it's messed up that a guy like that has such a good year and people aren't really talking about him. Now, granted, the Bears aren't the best team in the world right now, but he was, one of the bright spots on that team. And it's a shame that he doesn't get the credit that he deserves. Whenever they talk about running backs, it's always Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson and Ezekiel Elliott. And you didn't hear too much about Jordan Howard. And the only people that probably know who he is are fantasy football owners. And who knows, maybe they didn't even know about him until he started blowing up mid-season. So it's just a shame. Keep your eye out for that kid this year. He may blow up again. And with that offense and Mitch Trubisky, they're going to need a solid running game. So he could be that guy for him. And it's just a shame that he's underrated. Another running back, Darren Sproles. I feel like Darren Sproles is underrated and has been his entire career. And he's been phenomenal everywhere he's been, especially with the Eagles. That guy adds a certain thing to the team that's just like he gives them a spark. You can see when he's playing really well and catching balls and running, it seems like the team kind of goes with him as he goes. And he doesn't get a ton of carries or rushing yards. He only finishes with around 500 rushing yards for the season, but he'll also add 500 receiving yards to go with that. So most of the time he's over 1,000 yards for all purpose. And I just think he's incredibly underrated, the things that he can do. He's not a big guy. He's 5'6", 190 pounds, but he's really, really quick. He's like, I always said, he's like a squirrel in the road. It's just like, it's impossible to tackle the guy. He's got such a low center of gravity. He runs really precise routes, and he's a mismatch nightmare with some of these guys. So I feel like he's very, very underrated, and it's been that way everywhere he's been. I mean, when he was in New Orleans, he had the same kind of issue, and they let him go, which was incredible to me. And, the Eagles picked him up, and he's a big, big part of that offense and the return game as well. So I feel like he doesn't always get the credit, that he deserves. And he deserves quite a bit of credit. So another guy is a wide receiver for the Chargers, Tyrell Williams. I'm sure a lot of people have no idea who Tyrell Williams is, but I mean, he's a big wide receiver. He's 6'4", 210. He runs a 4.4 40, which is, pretty blazing fast. And he didn't get a whole lot of credit last year. And this guy had 70 receptions for over 1,000 yards. And nobody really talked about it. And he's the number 3 wide receiver on that team behind Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, with Mike Williams banged up, not knowing how he's going to do. I mean, he's probably going to move into the number 2 spot. But, I mean, he's a solid wide receiver. Like I said, he's very tall, and he's got some weight to him too. So he can catch those high balls that you throw in, or those 50-50 balls. He's going to come down with, 99% of the time. and another one that just doesn't get the credit he deserves. And, he's got a good quarterback in Phillip Rivers. And obviously he was targeting him a lot last year to have, 70 receptions and 1,000 yards. And he just doesn't get the credit he deserves. So, another one incredibly underrated. And then another wide receiver that this one really, really blows my mind that he doesn't get talked about as much as he absolutely should get talked about, because you get it whenever they talk about wide receivers, you always hear about Julio Jones, Odell Beckham, and like those are the first two guys they talk about because Odell's out there snagging balls one-handed and stuff like that. And yeah, he's a great wide receiver. And Odell Beckham has 288 receptions in a 3-year period, which I said is a record for most receptions in that amount of time. And the funny thing is, this next guy has the exact same amount of receptions, 288. And I'm talking about Jarvis Landry in Miami. And Jarvis Landry didn't have possibly a future Hall of Famer and Eli Manning throwing the ball. He had Ryan Tannehill. And he was still getting a job done ridiculously. This guy's, he's averaging 1,000 yards a season. He's incredible. He's got 3,051 yards in 3 years. And he's just a carbon copy of Odell Beckham. They're the exact same size, the exact same speed. They played together at LSU. Apparently they're like best friends or whatever. But Jarvis Landry is a phenomenal wide receiver and just never gets put up there when they're talking about, great wide receivers. And he is absolutely that. And with Jay Cutler coming to town and him being the gunslinger that he is and really likes to throw it out there, I expect him to have another big year. And, the fact that the guy has 90 to 100 receptions every single year is just phenomenal. Been in the league 3 years. And they talk about Odell Beckham and, how amazing he is and how many receptions he has. And you got a guy right there with exactly the same amount of receptions and doesn't get nearly the credit. And the other thing, when he is catching balls, when he has 100 yards a game, 80% of the time, Miami's winning that game, which is a much better stat than Odell Beckham. Because if you actually look it up, Odell Beckham, when he gets over 100 yards receiving, 75% of the time, the Giants are losing that game. That's not a great stat to have, and I don't know why it correlates to that or whatever it is, but that's just the facts. For some reason, when he's getting his touches and getting yards, the Giants don't win the game. It doesn't make sense, but maybe they're trying to target him too much and they're getting away from giving other guys the ball or coming off their game plan. I'm not sure, but it's just an odd stat. And last but not least, I feel like this is probably the most underrated guy in the league and has been forever. He constantly just gets, pushed to the side and never talked about. And that's Alex Smith, the quarterback for Kansas City. This kid is the epitome of consistency. He is a very, very good game managing quarterback. He's 6'4", 220. Last year he had 3,500 yards passing and 15 TDs and 8 interceptions. And that's like his stats for almost every single year. He'll normally have a little more touchdowns up around the 20 mark, but he always has single digit interceptions. He just does not turn the ball over too often. Like I said, he's a great, great game manager. And for some reason, he gets kicked to the curb everywhere he goes. He started his career in San Francisco and they were doing fine. And then obviously they got Colin Kaepernick and they started running that pistol and they fell in love with the excitement that Colin Kaepernick brought to the table. And when it was time, Alex Smith got shipped off to Kansas City. And Kansas City was 2-14 when that happened. His very first year there, he went 11-5. And every year since, they've been a double-digit team and in the playoffs. So to say that this guy's not a great quarterback is just ridiculous. because everywhere he goes, he knows how to win. And in Kansas City, like I said, he's been there. He's got 43 wins in 4 seasons. That speaks for itself. He took a team that was not very good, obviously, at 2-14, and helped them become a good team. And yes, he's not flashy. He's not going to throw for, 500 yards in a game and do things like that. But you know what? He's going to throw for 260 and, 2 touchdowns with no mistakes. And that's all anyone can ask for. That's all I would want. He keeps the team in good situations, and he doesn't lose the game for them, which is, it's amazing. And the guy gets absolutely zero credit. And since he left San Francisco, that following year, they had one good year. And since then, they've been below 500 since he left. And Kansas City has been in the playoffs every year. So you tell me if that was a bad mistake or not, which I absolutely feel like it was a very bad mistake to let him go, because the guy can just play ball and he gets no credit. And I mean, even in Kansas City, he's extremely undervalued, because after winning the division and going 12-4 this year, how did Kansas City reward him? Did they give him an extension, a new contract? No. They turned around in the draft and with their first pick took Patrick Mahomes. Like, are you kidding me? So now Alex Smith has to worry about this rookie who they took in the first round. Normally, if you take a quarterback in the first round, it's because you want to see him play sooner than later. So now Alex Smith has to contend with this guy, and I'm sure he's fine with it, because, the one thing he is too is a constant professional. So I'm sure he's going to handle it with no problems. And, I'm sure he'll say the right things and he'll take the competition as it comes to him. But I mean, as far as the franchise goes, that's just a really terrible thing to do to a guy, especially when he's been as successful for your franchise as he has. So that's just, I feel really bad for the guy, because he's extremely underrated and undervalued, and he just doesn't deserve it. So those are the players that I think are pretty underrated. Leave some comments. Let me know if there's players that you think are underrated, or somebody I missed, or anything like that. And it's always good to hear from you guys. Let me know what teams you want me to break down or anything like that. When the season officially starts, I'll be making weekly videos as well, picking games too against the spread. So be on the lookout for that. And I appreciate you guys watching. You can also check out Point of Attack on Facebook and on Instagram as well, and on Twitter at Dave Novak 33. And I want to give a shout out to a guy that's been helping me out behind the scenes. That's Robert Andrews. And my boy Murph, you got to check out his clothing line as well, Relentless Clothing. You can find that on Instagram and Facebook as well. So until next time, I appreciate you guys watching. Peace.